So hello everyone, good afternoon and welcome to MadeFor's free taster session, Why Your Organization Needs a CX Strategy. So before I will introduce our speaker of today, our lovely Charissa, I will quickly go through some introductions and a bit of a kickoff to make sure that we are all set. So as mentioned, I am sharing the Miro link in our chat today so that you can look with us and browse through the Miro board that we will be hosting our presentation on. Besides that, we'd love to see your faces to make it a bit more of a personal experience now in the online time. So if you can't put your camera on, that's always nice. We are recording this session for learning purposes and also to share some content on social. So if you object to that for any reason, please let us know in the chat. And as mentioned already, join via the link in our chat. So the objectives. What are we going to do and what is actually a free taster? Let's start with that. So a free taster is a session using a Miro board that you can hopefully see on my screen right now and your own screen if you're following the link, and a Zoom meeting to explain a current topic in relation to one of our bootcamps. And today that is customer experience strategy. So besides that, we're hosting our presentation here. There are lots of interactive elements as well. So feel free to have a look and interact with those as well on the board. We're really curious about your experience, so feel free to share. What is the objective of today's session? So we're going to go through a couple of topics. Firstly, Chris is going to elaborate on why organizations need a CX strategy in the first place. We're going to get inspired by some best practices of successful CX strategies. And we're rounding up our 30 minutes with an understanding of the practical implications of designing and implementing a CX strategy. Currently, we're in a kickoff, so I'm going to hand over to Charissa in a couple of moments, and we will end the session with a bit of a Q&A. If you have questions in the meantime, feel free to pop them in the chat, and we will definitely make sure to go through them at the end of our session. So Charissa, welcome. And if you can please introduce yourself, that would be lovely.
Thank you so much, Barbara. First off, just a big hello to everyone. It's really fantastic to see some familiar faces as well as some new faces here. So thanks so much for joining us with possibly your lunch hour, depending on your time zone. So yeah, I'm Charissa, and I'm actually from Chicago in the United States, but I recently moved to the UK to get my MBA. I figured there's no better time than a pandemic to move across the world, challenge my thinking, expand my skill sets, right? So that's a bit about me. This quote here on the screen is by Adam Grant. He's an author of Think Again, which in my opinion is a must read with our current kind of political, social climates, but as well for business leaders. I think this quote really captures one of my core guiding beliefs, which is we must always be learning and having humility to change our mind. So if you can't see the screen well, it says, if we can't learn to find occasional glee in discovering we are wrong, it will be awfully hard to get anything right. So just celebrating that playful spirit and willingness to learn and change our minds. To that end, I've been consulting across various industries since 2014. I've worked with a wide range of clients. I've learned a lot over the years. And customer experience has become kind of my specialty in recent years. So like this person here in the graphic at the bottom of the screen, my joy is really helping leaders untangle their challenges and finding their opportunities. So for today, we're going to think about what does it mean to really clarify and untangle customer experience and think through that customer experience strategy. So next slide, please. So many studies have shown the value of customer experience. Customer experience is increasingly the key differentiator for companies' brands and companies' overall performance. Most leaders say that customer experience is one of their top priorities in the coming years. And it's no surprise if you look at the data, there's a lot of stats that show the value of customer experience. Some of those are the higher customer satisfaction rates, reduced churn of customers, increased revenues. So there's more particulars there, but there's a lot of ROI when it comes to investing in a customer experience. But one of the challenges with customer experience, the core dilemma that I see over and over again, is that companies and especially leaders will think they have a really great customer experience, but in reality, their customers disagree. So you can see here, 80% of firm leaders think their CX is great, but actually only 8% of customers in this particular study agreed that the customer experience was actually great. So there's this discrepancy between the intended experience and the reality. So how do we close that gap? The image on the right here just highlights the complexity of organizations and how companies often fail to take that step back and really consider these layers and all the different touch points that customers experience in their interactions with the whole organization's ecosystem, right? There might be a really great point of customer experience, but the ecosystem as a whole might be really siloed, or there might be disconnects, and there could be pockets of bad experiences. So defining a CX strategy is about taking that step back to think more clearly about the strengths and gaps, and then realigning and de-siloing a company around a really clear CX strategy. So what does that look like? So today, I'm just going to talk through a couple examples that I really enjoy in terms of the importance of customer experience strategy. So one of them is with this company called Restoration Hardware, although they recently rebranded to RH. And so you can look them up if you're curious, because they're more of a United States-based company. So those of you who are here in Europe might not be as familiar with them. But if we rewind the clock several years ago, they were essentially a dying brand. They were really focused on selling furniture, right? They're a furniture store. And their focus on their products was, sales were ultimately decreasing. So they got this new CEO, and the CEO reoriented the company around customer-centric experiences. And he began trying to think through how he could help this company turn around and be more customer-centric. So what he did was he articulated a new vision and a new strategy for not selling products, but selling a lifestyle of taste and space experiences. And with this new vision, they were articulating key principles, right? So he articulated the vision, and then he articulated key principles for what that actually looked like when applied to their business. So they called this remarkable retail. And it included values like really memorable experiences, radical moments, and they, as an organization, oriented around this new vision and oriented around these new guiding principles. And from there, they began reimagining, what does that actually look like in their services? How does that actually shape and change their business model? So what they did was they launched these gallery flagship stores. So what you see here is a picture of a gallery in New York City. And you can see it's like, it's very luxurious and kind of beautiful from the outside looking in, right? And it is on the inside as well, I should say. But the main spirit here was they realized, you know what, we're a furniture store, but we can blur the lines between retail and hospitality. So they transformed as an organization from not just selling products and furniture, but instead selling hospitality experiences. So each of these gallery stores have restaurants and cafes, a really nice restaurants, not like a mall where you would have lots of different fast food chains, not like that, but like a luxurious restaurant, a luxurious cafe, and even entertainment. And what they do is they invite all of their customers to go to the restaurant and grab a drink, grab a mimosa, grab a glass of wine or a coffee, and then just walk around and explore the space. So then what happens is essentially I have all of these consumers who are enjoying this lavish space and imagining themselves living in this space and imagining a future where they could have this kind of home environment, right? So they're blurring the lines between hospitality and the actual products that they're selling, right? And so you can just see there how the vision and the principles, and then actually applying that into their business structure and business models was the strategy transforming the organization, and now they're incredibly successful. Yeah, selling the dream, as David Wall said. Yep, exactly. So going on to the next example then. So this is, I won't go into too much detail here because this is from actually a client that I worked with previously, but this was a healthcare client, and they were thinking through how to revitalize some of their digital experiences and customer experiences. Now, this company had a great reputation in the community, but they were just looking to improve and trying to look at their operations to see where could they really transform and introduce new services or transform existing services. So the way we did this with them was we sought to better understand the actual experience of their customers in order to get more clarity on what should that strategy be and how should they prioritize their efforts. So we talked to customers and we understood kind of visually and experientially what customers were experiencing. And through that, we learned about the crucial moment that made all the difference for customers was when they sat down with a doctor and could finally relax and breathe a sigh of relief because they have all this anxiety, having healthcare issues or taking care of their family or whatever it is. They could finally relax because they were in the presence of their doctor. And it was this moment of warm competence. And that moment became the beginning of this emerging customer experience strategy, where then this team was able to then take that step back to look at the full experience and say, okay, how do we now extend this warm competence throughout the whole customer journey, the whole customer experience? How do we rethink the very first touch point when customers interact with us? How do we rethink that moment and infuse that with some warm competence, right? How do we maybe design new products or services entirely to infuse more of that warm competence, right? So you can see just this is another example of a company who was really just getting started and needed help getting clear on what the experience should be, what the intended experience was compared to the actual lived experience for their customers, right? So I think a lot of companies are kind of at this point in their process where they know they want to have a great experience, but they're trying to get clear on what exactly that should look like. So next slide. Great. So just to kind of tie this together, right? So all companies have a customer experience, right? We know this, but unless leaders are clearly designing the experience across the ecosystem of the organization, there will likely be major gaps between the intended experience and the reality of the experience, right? So part of what we're advocating today is starting with that base level foundation of what is that customer experience you intend. And there's a lot that goes into that. So if we go to the next slide. Perfect. Thank you, Barbara. So Barbara mentioned, we have boot camps coming up, and with the customer experience strategy boot camp, we'll dive really, really deep into what does it look like to define a customer experience strategy. And we're going to be using a very hands-on, very practical approach for looking at an organization, seeing the complexity of the organization, and then working to get really clear on what is that vision, right? You can see here at the top of the pyramid. And then what are the principles that flow out of that, right? And then again, with the base level here, the roadmap, how do you apply that, right? What does that mean for the ecosystem of the organization? And additionally, are there KPIs that can be measured, right? To measure the success of that vision. So how do we think about KPIs? So this pyramid is a helpful framework for just thinking about the layers of a customer experience strategy and then how you begin to actually apply that into an organization. So you can think about the restoration hardware example in particular. So the CEO, he did exactly this, right? He thought about what's this new vision of the kind of organization we actually want to be. What were some of the key principles that flowed out of that? Being remarkable retail, these memorable moments, selling lifestyles and the dream, not the products, right? And then they were able to say, okay, how in the world do we actually give customers that experience. And then that created these galleries, right? These gallery flagship experiences. And it informed every little decision, like where the cafe was located. So they would walk to the back of the room of the whole building, get their wine, and then they're ushered to go explore, sit on the furniture, do whatever you want. The salespeople are acting like hosts in the space, rather than saying, can I get you anything? Do you want to buy that chair that you're sitting on? Instead, because they embrace this hospitality strategy, instead, the hosts would walk around and say, can I get you another glass of wine? Can I get you another mimosa? Do you want to go to our restaurant in the back? And the implicit message through all of Restoration Hardware's applied strategy was, you are welcome here. This is a space you can relax in. You could see yourself in this space in the future, right? So it was giving them that experience by thinking through these layers of the strategy pyramid. So I'm going to pause there. We've got a few minutes left with our time. I would love to hear from you all if you have any just general thoughts, reactions, or questions. There's always tons we could talk about, but just curious what's on your mind. Thanks, everyone.
Having a quick look in the chat, and I see that you have explained everything super clearly, Charissa, and showcased lovely examples. So not yet any questions. I see David is thinking about how he's going to onboard this for his agency clients. Nice. That's lovely to hear, David.
Yeah.
If there are no questions now, that is also, of course, totally fine. I see that now has a question. Can you share any major fails or common mistakes that you have come across maybe, or you can think of just?
Yeah. Thanks, Nal. I really appreciate that question. David Walsh, exactly. Where do you start? There's so many pitfalls that can happen. So one of the first ones that comes to mind for me, just because I've seen this happen, is the art of getting the right stakeholders involved and getting that stakeholder buy-in to actually execute on that process. So just, one pitfall can be a leader trying to cast this new vision, but maybe they didn't involve people in the creation of that vision. And so therefore, it's really hard for then the rest of the company to then actually act on the new strategy. Or the reverse could happen, of course, where you have maybe your directors or managers or other people trying to shape a new vision, but they didn't involve key leaders and decision makers, right? So then it's hard to then get them to also have that buy-in to actually take action. And so that's one of the big ones that I think often can get overlooked because it has such major implications, not only on the definition of the strategy, but then also in the application of what that looks like. And I'll just briefly say another big pitfall as well is not talking to the customers. A lot of organizations will say, this is our strategy, this is what we intend, it's going to be awesome. But they might have not talked to their customers to find out, is that actually something the customers want? Is that even a real experience for them, right? So teasing that out and aligning the internal and that external customer perspective.
Thank you. I see that we've got quite some extra questions in, so let's go through them. Halliday, any design on how to best engage your users in CX research or design?
Yeah, so how to engage users in that? There's, I think, so many great opportunities throughout this strategy defining process. So I definitely believe in co-creation, and I definitely believe in just customer research, not just like focus groups or surveys, but, one-on-one, more in-depth conversations. So I'd say when I think about how to engage end users, the first is, are there workshops or strategy workshops or key decision-making moments that you could actually maybe bring key representatives from your target customer base to join and help think critically about your ideas and help think critically about your strategies? So could you involve them in those workshops? And then the other is have can you take some time to do just enough? If you're not familiar with Just Enough Research by Erica Hall, it's one of my favorite books for customer research. But yeah, doing just enough to talk to customers, to find out their real experience, and mapping that or documenting that in some way, so you can see themes of what their experience is. I hope that helps.
Thank you. Did that answer your question indeed a bit? I hope so.
Yay,
Yes.
okay.
That's awesome. All right, Mike Rosenberg, another question. What are your experiences with co-creation in the process of defining these KPIs and creating these experiences?
Nice. Yeah. So what I think of with this as well is the importance of stakeholder involvement again. So if you think about, if you say, you could have a leader say, we want to be the best retail store on the planet. Involving like leaders from the technical team to figure out how would they measure that and monitor that from a technical standpoint, right? What would be the technology needed to track sales or to integrate, maybe that was a bad example, but thinking through the key stakeholders involved who would need to then actually create the mechanism for monitoring that data as you gather it, and also defining and making sure that it is clear what does it actually mean to say remarkable retail? How do you measure remarkable retail? And so just having those really candid conversations within the stakeholders, and then you can get aligned around that agreement, right? So that stakeholder involvement is really crucial.
Thank you, Charissa, for that. David, I see that you've also put in a question with a broad stroke. What KPIs would you be working to? Could you maybe elaborate a bit on that, what you mean with the question? Or Charissa, if you're happy to answer it, then also give it a go.
Yeah. So yeah, for the furniture place. Yeah. So so with KPIs, I mean, there's, industry metrics and things like net promoter scores and customer satisfaction, sort of some of those general KPIs that you could use. But I think it's really helpful to think in terms of more like balanced scorecards that are trying to align with the key principles or key values of what you're intending. So for example, with restoration hardware, kind of like I said a moment ago, and I should say, I don't know exactly what their KPIs are for restoration hardware, but if they say, we want to have memorable, remarkable retail experiences, having customer surveys, it's definitely valuable to do customer surveys to start to track and measure the level of how memorable was their experience, and then also in addition to that, have customers return, because if it was really remarkable or memorable, there we go, the customer should come back, right? So, or do customers just come once and then never think about it again? So thinking about that, also thinking about, did this experience lead to any sales of any kind, right? They're intentional to not force the sales process, but if it's doing its job, it should lead to sales. So can they see sales KPIs connected to that? So you can start to see how it's more of a balanced perspective of different metrics that all are in support of the ultimate vision and strategy there. Yeah, repeat sales, exactly. Yeah. And sorry, Barbara.
I see that, David, you asked LTV, AOV, and so on then as a follow-up question. So to quickly round this up. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think so. Honestly, just to be transparent, David Walsh, I'm blanking on what exactly those metrics are, and I probably should know right off the top of my head, but I could always circle back to you and just confirm and double check if you're curious about that. I see Daniel. Oh, yes, great. Thank you, David. Danielle, I think, had a question as well.
Yes. So I think that's also the last question that we're probably
Oh, okay.
going to go through. So thoughts on customer journey mapping and how to execute findings from the exercise across all teams, especially non-customer facing teams, where there seems to be most resistant or buy-in to CX. That's a good one.
It is a good one. I'm going to read it again just to make sure I captured everything in the question. So yeah, thoughts on customer journey mapping, how to execute the findings. Yes. So I think that customer journey mapping is incredibly valuable. I think it can be used poorly in the sense that it can be sort of a checking the box, look at us, we're doing the customer experience thing, because it's a very kind of popular concept. But I think when attached to these conversations around CX strategy and when really attached to the practical action taken from them, I think customer journey mapping is actually a really crucial part of the customer strategy and customer experience definition. And generally speaking, the way that I think about the customer journey mapping is feeding off of some things I've said before, which is one, prioritizing an initial workshop where you have the key stakeholders and even a key customer involved in the workshopping. So having, especially that initial workshop with your stakeholders to get clear on what is our perspective of this customer journey. Then going and actually talking to the real customers to find out what's their reality, right? So again, the intention versus the reality, to then synthesize their experiences into that journey map. Then again, with the stakeholders through a workshop together, you can then look at that. And then that's when you have those aha moments where everyone's getting aligned together and everyone's seeing the key themes. So there's less of that fight to convince them like this is important, or less of that need to get that buy-in when you're able to involve those key stakeholders in the actual workshops. So again, the one of like, what do we think is the experience? And at the end, going back and reflecting together. And then when you do that reflection together, then you can use that time with the stakeholders to think critically, okay, what are the really practical implications of this? What are the right next steps we need to take? Who else do we need to involve in that process? So when I've done it in the past, we would end with that action definition kind of takeaways and thinking about, if XYZ is a new product we want to implement, okay, who do we need to talk to, and creating, really attaching the journey to that action. Hope that helps. Sorry, that was a lot.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Danielle, also for the question. So I see that we are out of time. Thank you so much, Charissa, for providing us with a lot of interesting insights and learning during the half an hour. If you, of course, want to continue learning about this, you can always have a look at our website for the CX Strategy Bootcamp, and in general, follow us. The last thing I am very curious about is your overall experience of today. So please feel free to let us know in a quick poll that we are launching, and if you would like to plan in a chat for more information about the CX Strategy Bootcamp. And then that is it. I wish you all a lovely day, and thank you so much for attending.
Yes, thank you all so much. And I so appreciate your questions. Have a great day.